Welcome to the Future of Political Consulting, a podcast from the American Association of Political Consultants. Today, we're talking about prediction markets, including platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi, and why they're showing up more often in election conversations. To help us examine what these markets can and can't tell us, we're joined by John Phillips, CEO of PredictIt, one of the earliest election-related prediction markets. The conversation is moderated by Ruth Bernstein, president of EMC Research, who will bring a pollster's perspective to questions of measurement, influence, and professional responsibility. Let's get started.
Thank you, John, so much for joining us today. This is going to be, I know this is a topic that a lot of people are talking about right now. So first, do you want to say who you are? I'm Ruth Bernstein from EMC Research. John, who are you?
I'm John Aristotle Phillips. I'm the co-founder of Aristotle, which is the political technology company, and the co-creator with my brother of PredictIt.
All right, great. Well, prediction markets like Polymarket and Kalshi are just being talked about a lot right now as kind of serious, like election indicators. So you were involved in, election prediction markets way early. So, for people who aren't familiar with PredictIt, what was it designed to do and why?
Sure. Okay. So by way of backup, first, thanks for having me on. And hello to the fellow AAPC members. I've been an AAPC member since before prediction markets. So
Me too.
I very much appreciate the organization and the work that they do, and also the opportunity to network with people like you and other AAPC members. The annual conferences are the highlight of our year, and we try to get as many of the Aristotle employees to participate as possible, but we greatly value that. So this is great to be on the podcast. And PredictIt, so Aristotle, as I said, is a political technology company. We're about 160 employees. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have offices around the country and in some foreign countries, principally London and Toronto. And the company specializes in political data. PredictIt was created as a result of a suggestion from one of our original investors, who was an avid and thoughtful follower of politics. He's a business person. His name's Bill Hambrecht. He's legendary in sort of Silicon Valley investment lore, and he's been a mentor to me. I was sitting in Bill's office. It was immediately after the Obama-Romney election, and Bill had been tracking the betting markets, the Irish betting market in trade, to sort of divine more accurate information than what was being broadcast by media sources in terms of what the outcome was and what the horse race was. And he's a big believer in markets, given his professional background. And Bill said, "John, you got to take a look at these markets. Polling is increasingly difficult. It's increasingly expensive. What it does well, but it doesn't capture certain aspects of as well as it might." And so he recommended that we look at InTrade. Now, InTrade was in a bit of a fix. They were being shut down by the federal government as an unauthorized market being offered to Americans. Notwithstanding that, we were interested in this because many pollsters like yourself are customers of Aristotle, and we're at time for pulling voter data samples, for instance, and of course some of the other things we do with the voter data and the software for political purposes. And so we looked at it, and the more we looked at it, the more it became interesting to us as a possible business. But the problem was, as InTrade had found out to their sorrow, having a successful business and having it operate on the fringe of regulatory permission is a challenge. And so we were not going to do this if we couldn't find a way to do it legally in the United States. And so we began a search and found a precedent going back 35 years in which the Commodities Future Trading Commission, which is the regulatory agency that would regulate prediction markets, if they were allowed to exist. They had issued a no action letter to the University of Iowa, a group of professors there at the business school who wanted to set up a market to for forecasting purposes. And we patterned our request to the CFTC on University of Iowa's request from 35 years earlier, and we got approval from the CFTC to operate an experimental university-sponsored prediction market, which was great. And we went in with Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, which had been operating a prediction market for 7 years. They had run into difficulties with their own regulator in New Zealand about operating an unauthorized market. So it just shows that the resistance to these markets wasn't in the United States. And we received approval from the CFTC 14 years ago, actually 12 years ago to be precise. And we launched PredictIt, and it opened, and it was organically growing in the beginning. People, word of mouth, heard about it, and that's how we got involved in prediction markets. I can give you more history, more recent history, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of curious about what were you trying to figure out at the time? Was it research, or was it, an investment? What was your goal then?
Yeah, so
doing it,
as often happens in this sort of thing. So first of all, it was a business opportunity. We looked at the potential of betting markets as a business opportunity, and of course, in the United States, at that point, it wasn't even sports betting wasn't permitted. So we felt that operating a stock market, as the way PredictIt was structured, operating a stock market in which the price would reflect what the market participants thought the odds were of a particular event happening or not happening, so binary outcome. Mm-hmm. That was really interesting to us, just as a business venture. And PredictIt, right. Aristotle had incubated other innovative technologies over the years. We've been around 40 years, so since 1982, and 1983 and 1984 when the company got started, and my brother and I graduated from college. So it was first and foremost a business opportunity, but it was also we had to do it to comply with the regulators. To get a no action letter similar to what Iowa got, we had to have university affiliation. So the research purpose of it, we now have about 200 universities that have signed contracts with PredictIt. There's no money that changes hands. They don't pay us anything, but they are allowed to get the anonymized trading data for use in courses, or for use in their teaching, or for use in their research, and that's ongoing, and that continues to this day.
So, so what do you think is kind of the important differences between PredictIt and, Kalshi and maybe some of the other platforms that exist today?
Sure. So PredictIt's been around longer, obviously. The Kalshi got a what's called a DCM, designated contract market designation from the CFTC. So did PredictIt, but Kalshi got that first. This was after we'd been operating PredictIt for 5 or 6 years. So the differences are the differences are as follows. PredictIt has very precise identity verification in terms of who the traders are. And I can't speak to what Kalshi does. They do some of this, and they'll probably have to do more of it, as will Polymarkets and others, certainly, if they're going to continue to operate in the United States. So you need to have some KYC, some know your customer, some anti-money laundering precautions in place if you're going to run a stock market. You also need other types of surveillance, is what it's called in the regulatory lingo, to make sure there isn't market manipulation and to catch it when there is, but also to comply with certain regulations that all of these prediction markets are going to have to comply with. So they vary in that way. Kalshi is bigger, significantly bigger than PredictIt in terms of the number of traders. PredictIt is more accurate. in terms of the accuracy of the forecast. And that's not to say, and we can talk about accuracy, it's not to say that it's flawless, because it is not flawless. And when markets forecast, as you know, when markets forecast a 60% chance of something happening, what that forecast means, if it's accurate, is that 40% of the time something else is supposed to happen.
Right.
So it's not an indication of certainty, because many of these markets, very few of these markets operate at 100% until the resolution. None of them, frankly. So, but the markets, the size, the number of traders, we have demographics on our traders, which are interesting, because we verify their identity against a registered voter roll or a licensed driver record, or other types of national ID in other countries. So that's one of the distinctions. And then we have an educational purpose in addition to the business purpose. That's been blessed by the CFTC, most recently in the fall of last year, when we settled the litigation with the CFTC.
You talked about that you verify the individual to make sure they're real. Are there certain groups or that aren't allowed to be allowed to trade? I mean, people that know a lot about politics already?
That's a very good question. First of all, so we'll talk about insiders and how information comes into the system. That's a great question. There are restrictions. You got to be 18 years of age or older, for instance. So, and Aristotle has another business which we incubated called integrity, and the integrity business is identity and age verification and KYC and AML. That's know your customer, anti-money laundering. That's utilized. So our integrity division provides customer onboarding and customer identity verification to almost every large and many small online betting platforms that are regulated, either according to UK regulations or European regulations or US regulations or regulations from other countries. So we have these licensed online betting companies that principally offer sports betting. Many of them use integrity to comply with the regulations in their state or country. And integrity, in fact, is licensed in all 30 of the states that permit online gaming. It's licensed to provide compliance services. So now, inside information, it's a great subject. So with prediction markets, what you have is a relatively efficient way of looking at a lot of signals, price signals, sometimes billions of pieces of information that are coming in, certainly millions of pieces of information that are coming in from thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of traders who are sending price signals. Now, how do they know how do people get that information? Well, they get that information or think they have that information either because they're astute followers of politics, or they think maybe they are better at forecasting than their colleagues. The question which we should get to is, what makes for a super forecaster, for instance, is very interesting. It's one of those things that's being studied by these professors that are looking at the anonymized data and trying to understand what makes for a super forecaster. What happens when the forecaster is incorrect? What habits do these super forecasters have, for instance, or forecasters more generally, traders, if you will, in the jargon of prediction markets? What information do they have? So a lot of the information is public information, but invariably in any market, a lot of information is not public information. And it's information that someone might have because of who they know or a conversation they had or someone they're married to. It might be pillow talk. It could be all kinds of sources of information. What makes these forecasting markets so accurate is they are a magnet for information. And people who think they have superior information, whether it's betting on the stock market, which is just 10 blocks from where I'm talking to you today, or it has to do with a sporting event, people think they have information that gives them an edge. And And they employ that information. Now, there are laws against insider trading on regulated markets, which is why we think these markets should be regulated and carefully regulated. Because if you don't if you force these markets, first of all, these markets have existed long before PredictIt came along, long before the University of Iowa. You could go down to 100 years ago,
Right.
You go down to the stock market, and on the steps of the exchange, you could bet on political outcomes. And these markets generally were pretty accurate. Now, there's other ways to forecast and forecast accurately, including polling, which is a great job. We use polling ourselves to understand some of the motivations and some of the deeper questions having to do with who these traders are and what kind of information they have. So, inside information, there is information that flows into these markets, every market, which is not known to the public. But some members of the public may have this information, and then they are right now, mm-hmm. they're as are members of Congress and others, they're subjected to limitations in terms of how they can use information that's non-public that they've received as a result of their job or their employment or their position.
But they can be in the market because essentially what you're doing is modeling real life. When I go vote, I know more than other people because I've been involved in politics and I do polling. So that's just accurately represented in a prediction market as well. People like me.
It's the reality. Oh, yeah.
It's just the reality. So like
you specifically, but people who have the same job or have a job in politics or legislation or business for that matter, either have or think they have information that's superior information.
Right. So they can be in the predictive. Right. So there's no restriction for them to be in the prediction market because it's the same. They're just bringing in information they think they have along with people who don't have it. They're not allowed in the market.
I'm saying they're subject to the same laws as everybody else. If they're using material non-public information that they're not allowed,
then they cannot be in the market.
They cannot be in the market, right?
Okay. So so you're not supposed to be in the market if you have information. If you work in Congress, you know something about what might be decided, then you shouldn't be betting.
Not just shouldn't. No, there's a law against.
There's laws against. Yes. Okay.
And same with working in a business and you have material non-public information about merger and acquisition. Acting on that material non-public information is against the law.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought, and I just wanted to clarify that. So talking about then to the universe, obviously, right? We've taken out the people that shouldn't be in there. So as I mentioned, I'm with EMC Research. As you know, I'm a pollster. I've been doing polling for a lot, over 3 decades. So we're always looking at, and as you mentioned, it's getting harder and harder to do polling, harder to get a representative sample. But our goal is to get a representative sample of the universe of those that are going to be, making a decision, voting in a market. So how are the prediction markets, being represented? Who is being represented in that market price, and how does it compare, I guess, to polling? They're different.
Great question. Okay. So I'll give you the general description, then we'll go into the specifics, because you'll see that the general description fails to capture really an adequate, satisfying answer to that question. So we and I can speak from personal experience. We use focus groups and we use quantitative means to ascertain answers and direction to certain questions. An example would be we survey our PredictIt traders and ask them what new markets would they like to see on PredictIt. What do they like about PredictIt? What they don't like about PredictIt? And the shorthand I use, and you're going to be more articulate than this than I will ever be, is that if you want to understand why somebody feels the way they do about a particular issue or candidate, I'm not aware of any way better to do that than with focus groups and with polling. If you want to know what markets are forecasting in terms of outcomes without any explanation as to the why. But just if you want an accurate forecast of what's likely to happen, markets are pretty good at doing that because they are not. They're good in a couple. They're effective in a couple of ways. First of all, they are immediately responsive. You don't have a couple of days to go out, pull the sample, ask the questions, tabulate the results. These things operate on a hair trigger, and you can see, for instance, an example is Biden's performance in the debate against Trump. You could see the odds shifting real time on Biden's chances of election, or even remaining the nominee. So markets are great because they're so responsive. They're also highly efficient in scooping up large amounts of information and giving price signals, which is it's really difficult to do what you do well. Markets sort of inherently will reflect what lots of people who are not randomly selected, who are not representative of the general electorate. And I can give you some examples of the demographic skew of people who participate, generally speaking, in prediction markets, at least the ones that we operate. But it skews male, for instance, heavily skews male. That may be a function of the kind of people who are attracted to betting markets. It may have to do with the way the betting markets or the forecasting markets are marketed and to whom they're marketed, for instance. But the people who are, it's interesting in that, for instance, we know the party affiliation of the people who are betting in the betting markets because we verify the identity of these people. That's one of the differentiators between us and some of the other prediction markets. But the breakout's roughly a third, and a third between registered Republicans, registered Democrats, registered Independents. Okay. Used to be, I haven't looked at it in the last year, but and then if you look at, it's not a random sample. It's not a representative sample.
Right.
It's people who are inclined to put down $25 or $25,000 on a forecast, and that by drawing information in with the financial incentive, you are getting people to bet with their heads rather than their hearts in terms of what they think is going to happen, and that's one of the differentiators.
Does obviously, I mean, right now maybe campaigns aren't using prediction markets, as part of their strategy. Do you think they should, or how can they be used? I mean, it feels like maybe prediction markets, as you mentioned from the Biden example, or we saw example yesterday, and when we had a new candidate in the governor's race in California, how quickly the markets changed. Are they a good indication of where things might be changing, where polling is a point in time, right? I take a poll, this is how people feel today. Are the prediction markets maybe an indicator of this might be what's changing in the world, or in opinion?
They certainly pick up information. They certainly pick up signals that are forward-looking in terms of, because if you're asking somebody what do you think the outcome of the California governor's race is going to be in terms of these candidates, markets are pretty effective. That's not 100%, not even close to 100%, but markets are pretty effective, and the research that these professors are doing seems to validate that. Which is not to say that as I said before, if it's a 60% odds, some people say, well, what good is that? If it's 60% odds, and if it's 70% before the debate and 40% after the debate, well, of course, but a poll would pick that up if you did a poll right before and after. The point is, these markets are quite effective at pulling in information, and it's not just pulling in the information; it's distilling it into odds by prices. So they quickly give you a price signal, which is an odds signal and as we've talked about, it's those people who are in the market that the odds reflect. What the beauty of this, if you can call it beauty, is that the markets are very good at attracting people with information who may be able to more accurately forecast. Now, sometimes the know-it-alls got it wrong, and that happens, right? And so that's one of the most interesting areas of research, I think, that's being done is what happens? Why do markets sometimes get it wrong when there's a black swan event, for instance? What about right? Because there are a lot of people in these markets that have there's certain biases of people that come into these markets and human beings in general. So there's a long shot bias, right? People like to bet on long shots because of the multiplier effect.
Right.
I mean, I do that in this. I make stupid bets in the stock market on biotech firms, in my case, which is my weakness, stuff I know very little about, but it sounds good to John. And plus it looks hard, but it's a penny stock and it doesn't, and I love that. And I lose a lot of money on it. And that's why it's a penny stock.
I could put money today on the San Francisco Giants winning the World Series. It'll be 1,000,000 to 1. But it's a good payout, right?
Right, but it's a certain sense of satisfaction, and there's a lot of these people, a lot of the people in there. We have about 400,000 people who've signed up for PredictIt. A fraction at any given time, depositing, betting, and doing all this other stuff. One of the great things about PredictIt, we haven't really talked about how it works. One of the great things about PredictIt is that you don't have to stay in the market. You can love Gavin Newsom at 40 cents to be the Democratic nominee in 2028, and you can hate him at 60 cents. So you can buy Gavin at 30 and sell him at 60. You pocketed 30 cents profit. You've doubled your money. And you can go back, but you dump Gavin when you think the market is overestimating his odds. It's incredibly addictive in that way because it's so much fun to have buy low, sell high, and what is great? What is better than that if you can do it on a activity in human life that we both love, which is a democratic process, and you can sort of actually try to forecast and beat these other forecasters that are out there, these other people who are putting their money where their mouth is, and it's quite satisfying when you make a buck doing this.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, that it's not necessarily about predicting. For many of the people involved, it's not actually about predicting the right outcome, about the win, right? So it might be, I'm not even going to get all the way to the election. I'm going to play that. Yeah.
I think this guy, I'm not referring to Gavin, but I think this guy is going to flub the debate. So I'm going to short this guy before the debate. And I'm going to make myself some money by doing this. And the fact is, we're you especially, we're all of us on this, listening to this podcast, have some involvement in political campaigns and know the ups and downs and the unpredictable nature of certain events in political campaigns. And so, if you think if your sense is that somebody is overpriced in terms of what the market's assigning the odds, that's a buying opportunity. And or selling opportunity if you think it's overpriced,
right?
Buying if you think it's underpriced.
So you mentioned that, I think you said that you have about 400,000 users in PredictIt. Is that what you said, roughly?
Which is,
and what are some of the other Kalshi and some of the other bigger markets? Do you have any sense of how you said they're much larger?
Well, in terms of trades, now one of them doesn't. So one of them, I shouldn't speak conclusively about what the other guys are doing at this point, but I know that we emphasize, because we had to be regulated and to be approved and to receive the no action relief from the CFTC a decade ago. We had to do certain know your customer and anti-money laundering and other restrictions. So, for instance, at PredictIt, we do not yet invite foreign persons to open accounts, and we screen for that. And we've got a long waiting list of people who want to get in. Some of those 400,000 are actually none of those 400,000, but there are tens of thousands of people who want from foreign countries who are not on U.S. soil who cannot open an account on PredictIt. And if you open, so that's one of the distinctions. And so you don't have people. So you also have a position limit in PredictIt. There's a position limit, meaning you can't. It's the maximum you could buy, and the position limit was $850, and that was indexed. But we just received from the Commodities Future Trading Commission permission to expand that to $3,500, which is tied, interestingly enough, to the federal personal campaign contribution limit.
Okay.
So our litigation against the CFTC when they wanted to shut down PredictIt, this was 2 years ago. We had news organization join us because there's a group of people out there, myself included, believe this is First Amendment activity, is to put your money where your mouth is. And there was a lot of criticism of the CFTC, much of it justified, that they were misusing taxpayer resources trying to shut down tiny PredictIt or keep these other prediction markets from operating. And of course, as we alluded to earlier, what that would have succeeded at doing and did succeed at doing is driving this activity offshore, which is
okay. So that's what's happening.
There's no regulation. There's no transparency as to how the odds are derived. There's no customer protection, right? There's no identity verification. So that was clearly a non-starter, and it was a disruption for the market. The CFTC under new leadership took a different view of prediction markets, thankfully, and they are and they're looking carefully because there needs to be consumer protection. There needs to be.
So now they're allowed and regulated. And do you feel like there needs to be more regulation?
I think there needs to be more intelligent regulation. More is such a broad term that, and I've been doing this for a decade, and regulation isn't the panacea, but there needs to be guidelines for how these markets are operating. They've taken on such importance in the dialogue that I wouldn't say that polling needs to be regulated broadly. I don't know much about the what the regulatory framework is for much. I followed what the data use requirements and those regulatory changes in the political industry, but that has to do with privacy regulations. And
right.
So I think there needs to be. I think these markets need to be encouraged. I think they're going to go. They have the potential really to transform in a very positive way the way that we interact with the world around us by educating and allowing people to understand how odds work. We're as human beings, we're often calculating the odds. Often, I mean, like every second. Am I going to cross? If I cross this street, am I going to get hit by that bus? Right. So we are always calculating odds, and to be able to understand human activity in the sense that it's not definite this is going to happen or that's going to happen, but the odds of this are going to happen. It's very helpful. It's very helpful for investors. And so
sorry, go ahead.
No. That's
I was just say, as these markets become bigger and bigger and more public, more people are aware of them because I think it's still fairly small, but relatively, as they become more bigger, kind of what's the line between like reflecting public belief and then shaping public opinion? Like,
great question. But and the same question could be applied to polling, right?
Right.
So it's okay. So I don't see the inherent harm in people knowing that a public opinion poll conducted by campaign or a news organization indicates that things are headed in a certain direction or not headed in a certain direction. I don't see the harm in that. I mean, there's an argument, I understand, that if people think the election's over before the election's over, that they may stay home, and they do stay home. That's part of the democratic process, is people making a decision for themselves whether they want to vote or not. Or so I don't see. I don't share the concern that these markets, because people form an opinion by looking at what the odds are or looking at what the polling results are, that somehow we're going to regulate dissemination of polling results or dissemination of predicted market odds because we want to protect this image of democracy, which is that it operates in a vacuum. Of course, people are going to make up their mind based on whether they think somebody has a chance of winning. The whole primary game, where most of these elections are decided, is a sorting out process of partisans in terms of who and what they think is going to happen, is likely to happen, and they will dismiss and be dismissive of long shot candidacies based on information and based on betting.
But is there a danger? And I don't want, the presidential race, the big Senate races, those all have tons of public polling. Let's just, a mayor's race in a medium-sized city. A mayor's race in a medium-sized city, there may be no public polling, right? Yeah. Maybe one poll, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the campaign will do internal polling. And, there are likely to be memos or pitches about why certain candidates are likely to win, because we're trying to get a candidate, get their support, get partners, and this candidate is, you use fundraising. But in that case, is it possible for the prediction market to basically drive sort of false support for a candidate and that isn't based on issues or who's better for the city, but is just, based on because their name or something, or it's a group of volunteers who are like, I'm going to just start driving, interest in this candidate.
Yeah. So that happens, mm-hmm. right? There are presidential campaigns that use predicted results and certainly use polling results to raise money. No question about that one.
Right.
And they use predicted results to say, we're in the front of the pack. Most people think we're going to be the nominee. Get on board. So that is going to happen. And that is, to my way of thinking, that is part of the democratic process, is handicapping who's got a chance of winning. And then donors make decisions based on what the handicapping shows. And so, yes, I'm not saying it doesn't influence. Mm-hmm. Donors and volunteers and news organizations. I mean, news organizations are now regularly quoting prediction market odds. Not all of them, but many of them, mm-hmm. to substantiate the point that they're making, in the column heading as to what's going on in a particular race, and they will cite the betting market odds.
Right.
If the betting market odds are honestly derived, I don't have a problem with that. If the volunteers are trying to pile in to show, or fat cats are trying to pile in to show, to tip the odds. I mean, the verdict on first of all, remember, we have it predicted, which the other guys don't have. We have it predicted position limits. And the Congress, in its wisdom, determined that for $3,500, you weren't going to be able to buy an election if you give that mm-hmm. money. Now, that's part of the reason the position limit on predicted has been tied to $3,500, because with $3,500 in most races, you're not going to be able to shift the odds, where you've got thousands of people who are eager to see Ruth put down her hard-earned money on a long shot bet that's never going to materialize, and they will gladly take Ruth's money on that bet. And so the odds themselves, where you have position limits, since a billionaire doesn't have any more slot mm-hmm. at mayor's race,
right,
than somebody else, you're not going to see the odds being tilted. That's not to say we don't need to watch out for odds being tilted.
Right. But the other markets don't have the same limits.
They don't. They don't. And I'll let them explain why those odds are. I mean, you might say, you hear me say it first, that's why the prediction market, that's why PredictIt maybe, just maybe more accurate than markets where you have people able to swing the odds with bets. Now, whether it's PredictIt or other prediction markets, if you are playing that game, and that first story we talked about where I was sitting in Bill Hambrick's office and he was talking about the Romney Obama race, and there was somebody reputed who became known as the Romney whale who was in there, apparently trying to spend a couple $1 million, lost a couple $1 million trying to shift the odds to Romney in that election. And it was, it worked in a very short term, and then it failed spectacularly because as long as you don't have a restriction on the people coming into the market who can bet against that whale, the odds are probably pretty accurately going to reflect, not perfectly, but pretty accurately reflect what's going to transpire. And that goes for a mayor's race or anything. But make no mistake about it. Volunteers are piling in to PredictIt because when people make a bet, despite the great words about separating your head from your heart and all that business, people are emotionally driven. And that's one of the professors are looking at is, where is the line between someone who's how does partisan preference impact behavior? It's a fascinating subject, right?
Right, because even if I am a hardcore Democrat, will I vote for will I bet on a Republican because even though I don't want that person to win, will I bet because I think they might win? And
we have a name, we have a word for that. There's all this nomenclature that's developed in the prediction market strata. That's called an emotional hedge.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to give money on this side to this candidate, and I'm going to bet against the candidate I just gave money to, so that if he doesn't get or she doesn't get elected, at least I have the satisfaction of having made some money on this bet, on this preference. So people use it for an emotional hedge, and they use it for all kinds of reasons, some of which are known only to them. But when you get for instance, the other thing about these prediction markets, which we haven't talked about, is that they are an engagement tool on steroids. So once you have a little bit of skin in the game, you are going to consume more information about that event. And this is proven again and again and again with sports betting, is that which we don't do, but sports betting. ESPN found that people who have a little bit of bet, a small bet, consume 8 times as much information about that sporting event and the teams and the players and the odds and the rest of that stuff. So that's, to me, without overstating it, that's to me one of the great gifts from these predictions. Is they drive engagement and participation. People may not like the reason behind it, and some people think corruption of democracy and all this business. You've heard it all, Ruth. I mean, you hear the same thing about polling, the same thing about political consultants in the audience for this podcast, is that we're somehow undermining the sanctity of the Democratic process. It's a lot more grubby.
So, that's interesting because one argument is, this is just another sportification of politics, right? We've already made red teams and blue teams, and we're making light of politics as just a sport, but it's really more serious than that. But your argument, and I think it's interesting that we're all trying to get people more involved and actually interested in reading about the candidates and reading about the issues, and that maybe by making bets on it, it will actually make them take it more seriously because they will do research on it.
They'll do research on it. When they do research on it, they buy subscriptions. When they buy subscriptions, they support news organizations. And so another benefit, you can put this. Look, I'm not saying these things are perfect, and they're certainly not a gift from God. But the fact of the matter is, this is a new way to monetize for news organizations, which devote substantial resources to political coverage. It's expensive to do good political coverage, and it's very hard to monetize that for news organizations. I'm talking about big and small, very hard for small news organizations. The newspaper covering the mayor's race in the mid-sized town. Right? Very hard for them to get a return on their investment in following politics and who's at the sewer commission meeting and all that stuff. Prediction markets, where they are operated by news organizations, allow the news organization to monetize the information that they are putting in the pages of that newspaper and trying to sell. Because look, if you ignore the coverage of that mid-sized mayor's race, if you ignore that coverage and you bet, you're going to lose your money.
Right, because you're not, yeah.
I guarantee it. Somebody else is reading the newspaper, following goes to the town hall meeting, judges for herself the quality of the candidate and the odds and the rest of it. That person, I'm sorry to say, is going to have an edge, an information edge. And that's not a bad thing. So news organizations should be, and they're starting to. It's been a decade, but they're starting to embrace prediction markets as a way to make some money off the news, and in particular political news. And it's not restricted to political news. It can be political, it can be sports, it can be cultural. You can bet on the Kennedy Center, the name of the Kennedy Center. You can bet on all this stuff. And so these are ways in which news organizations can really can strengthen the bottom line.
That's an interesting thought, and I'm sure many who are, if people are listening, that's a good debate for everyone to take on.
It's not one side. I mean,
I think that's an interesting perspective. All right, what else about either PredictIt specifically, or about the predictive markets have I forgotten to ask you and you'd like to add, John?
Okay. Well, the URL is predictit.com. And if you go to PredictIt, you can open an account, and you can do it with as little as $10. A lot of people come in, or these small people come in small, and they stay small. There is a position limit now of 3,500, so you're not likely to lose your house if you get carried away. And it's just have some fun with it, because it is fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time on this really very, very current topic to take the time to talk to us about it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, and hello to my fellow AAPC members.
Yeah, agree. See you at the conference.
Thanks for listening to The Future of Political Consulting, presented by the American Association of Political Consultants. For more conversations like this and resources for political professionals, visit theaapc.org. We'll see you next time.